Big developments on the Epstein files. The House Oversight Committee is preparing for tomorrow's deposition of Jeffrey Epstein co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell. It will be the first opportunity for lawmakers to directly confront her with questions. Maxwell will appear virtually during a closed committee hearing. Here's what survivor Danielle Bensky told me she expects.
I don't trust anything that she has to say. She is a master at the art of deception. And so even just having her speak is a little bit disconcerting because we just want to make sure, she's in this for herself. So we want to make sure that this isn't just her way of trying to get even more of a sweetheart deal. We are all sitting on the edge of our seats, I think, to see what she has to say. But I also think she's perjured herself so many times that I just hope that everybody takes it with a grain of salt.
And joining me now, we have Eric Fudali, lawyer representing Epstein-Maxwell survivors. So, Eric, I'm glad you're here. Does Danielle reflect what you're hearing from your clients, and what are they hoping lawmakers will press Maxwell on?
Absolutely. We certainly agree, and we certainly have those same concerns. It's important to remember Ghislaine Maxwell, one, is a convicted child sex trafficker. Two, she is someone who's been accused of perjury, lying under oath. And three, she is someone who is trying to curry favor, perhaps get a pardon or clemency from one of the people she's likely to be asked questions about. So you combine those three things, and it is very, very difficult to trust anything Ghislaine Maxwell is going to say during this hearing or during this deposition. It's just, we just don't trust her. And also, I've heard she's going to plead the fifth, and she's likely not going to answer any real substantive questions. So I'm not really looking forward to this. I don't think she deserves a platform to be given or to be giving any more attention. She should just be sitting behind bars where she belongs.
You've said, Eric, you had one client whose name was posted 538 times in the most recent release. How did she react to seeing herself exposed in this way while DOJ redacted and protected the names of potential Epstein enablers?
Well, that's just it. That's the most jarring and frustrating part is that, you could say it's incompetence. You could say they made a mistake. They missed her name, but they didn't make any mistakes and they didn't miss any names when it came to redacting potential abusers, redacting, suspicious emails and suspicious people who you certainly want to know, are these people abusing these young women? Who's this person who's talking to Jeffrey Epstein about victims and girls? I mean, that's what's so almost re-victimizing for my clients, for the survivors, is that the DOJ did such a fantastic job redacting potential abusers, but did such an atrocious and embarrassing job redacting the names of the people whose names should be protected, and that is of the survivors.
And you'd think that was what they were doing that delayed them 6 weeks to releasing the files past the legal deadline to do so. That said, after the latest mentions, we have seen at least 6 men either resign or be ousted from very high-profile positions, even though none of them are accused of abuse or even under investigation for any wrongdoing. We also see new details about communications with Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Similarly, none of them are accused of any wrongdoing. And Bill Gates even addressed the new details in a new interview with an Australian journalist. Eric, let's watch this.
I was one of many people who regret ever knowing him.
You've no doubt seen the allegations, including some of them from the last 24 to 48 hours. Are they true?
No, apparently Jeffrey wrote an email to himself. That email was never sent. The email is, false. So I don't know what his thinking was there. Every minute I spent with him, I regret and I, apologize that I did that. It's factually true that I was only at dinners. I never went to the island. I never met any women. And so, the more that comes out, the more clear it'll be that although the time was a mistake, it had nothing to do with that kind of behavior.
Eric, do you believe him? I mean, have you come across anything in the Epstein files that contradicts his explanation?
No, I haven't seen evidence that contradicts anything Mr. Gates said. But I think what's important generally when looking at the men whose pictures you posted is it's important to recall that despite the sweetheart deal Alex Acosta gave Jeffrey Epstein in 2008, he did make him become a registered sex offender, and that was public knowledge. Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty. He was a registered sex offender. So while certainly it's not necessarily a crime and there's been no accusations or evidence that any of those men committed crimes, I do think they deserve some questioning, and I do think they could certainly deserve some scrutiny and some hard questioning as to why. why they continued perhaps to associate closely, party with, ask to party with, visit the island, have a very close association with someone they either knew or very much perhaps turned a blind eye or should have known was a registered sex offender and continually surrounded by women. So absolutely, there's been no evidence, at least that I've seen, and no accusations against any of those men that you posted. But I do think anyone who continued to have close association with Jeffrey Epstein in a social setting after 2008 just deserves some questions as to why.
So are we near the end of the Epstein saga, or are we closer to the beginning in a way now that documents held by DOJ are finally seeing the light of day?
I hope the latter. I mean, certainly it's been the prerogative of this administration to sort of quash this story and to move on to other stories. But it's been the courage, it's been the bravery, and the intent to not let this be buried of the survivors that I think has driven all this. So my hope and my intent is to have this just be the beginning. We do have a lot of documents. I have plenty to say about the disaster in which they were provided and some of the redaction. I think there needs to be a lot more redactions and a lot more documents provided. However, there is a lot of information. We are seeing certain men being held accountable, maybe not within the law, but of their employment and public, and public perception. So, yeah, for me, this is just the beginning. We are going to continue to fight on behalf of these survivors until every single man who either facilitated or co-abused with Jeffrey Epstein is held accountable.
All right, Eric Fideli, duly noted. Thank you very much for your time. We'll see you again.
Last night, Will Lewis, the embattled CEO and publisher of The Washington Post, stepped down just 3 days after the paper laid off a third of its staff and eliminated or gutted several areas of coverage. Will Lewis will be replaced by the current CFO, Jeff D'Onofrio. Lewis, though, was nowhere to be found during the call on Wednesday in which those mass layoffs were announced. He was spotted after the next day, by the way, after an NFL red carpet event in San Francisco. Lewis's farewell letter was just 4 sentences long, but it was noteworthy. In it, he thanked the paper's billionaire owner, Jeff Bezos, but made absolutely no mention of the Post's journalists. If you go to the Washington Post website right now, you'll see the phrase, "Democracy dies in darkness." It's emblazoned on the masthead. That motto made its first appearance in 2016, which is when the Post's then executive editor Marty Baron interviewed Jeff Bezos and asked what had driven him to buy the newspaper in 2013.
I think a lot of us believe this, that democracy dies in darkness, that certain institutions have a very important role in making sure that there is light.
9 months later, "Democracy dies in darkness" was rolled out as the paper's new motto, a month into President Trump's first term. Now, the Post said at the time it was not meant to be a response to Donald Trump specifically, but at a time when the president repeatedly attacked the press as the enemy of the people, the motto felt like it carried an added significance, not merely as a warning, but as a promise to keep shining a light. And considering the extreme lengths that the Trump administration has gone to over the years to distort the truth, a robust press that holds our leaders to account is more vital than ever. The former Washington Post associate editor Ruth Marcus told me this yesterday.
It's not just that democracy dies in darkness, as a wise man once said. It's that corruption flourishes in darkness.
Bezos had the right idea in 2016, and for several years he was celebrated for his stewardship of the Post. But along the way, after Trump's first term, something changed. As the prospect of Trump returning to the White House became very real in 2024, critics say Bezos started to interfere in editorial matters. Things came to a head when he abruptly blocked the paper's planned endorsement of Kamala Harris 11 days before the election. Bezos then revamped the opinion section, pushing out most of its left-of-center voices, and announced moving forward that the editorial section would only publish in support of the twin pillars of personal liberties and free markets. All of this was widely seen by many as the Post appeasing Trump, leading to an exodus of subscribers and waves of resignations. Marty Baron, who interviewed Bezos in 2016, told The New Yorker this week, quote, "Bezos' sickening efforts to curry favor with President Trump have left an especially ugly stain on their own. This is a case study in near-instant self-inflicted brand destruction." Bezos told Barron in 2016 that democracy dies in darkness. He emblazoned it on the Post's masthead. But after this week, it sure feels like Bezos himself is turning out the light. I'm joined now by the longtime journalist Marty Baron. Baron served as the executive editor of the Washington Post from 2012 to 2021. Just 7 months into that tenure, Baron learned that Amazon's Jeff Bezos would be buying the paper. Marty's book, Collision of Power, Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post chronicles that episode and so much more. Marty, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. Marty, help us separate the wheat from the chaff here. There is a reality that major publications and media organizations are suffering financially and need to be innovative about what their futures look like. And then there's a reality that very rich people in this country are bending the knee to Donald Trump. And those two seem to have intersected at this week's layoffs at the Washington Trump, but they seem to have been going on, rumbling for a while at the Washington Post.
Yeah, look, I mean, the Washington Post is facing all the same challenges that other media organizations are facing. This is a very tumultuous time in the media environment, and generative AI has made it even worse. You do a Google search, they come up with an answer. You don't have to go to a link, don't have to look at a media outlet. Traffic is plummeting as a result of that. So there's a real need for dramatic changes. That said, at the Washington Post, things have been made dramatically worse, I think, by the behavior of the owner, starting 11 days before the election in 2024, when he canceled the editorial endorsing Kamala Harris and said the paper wouldn't endorse anymore. Then he appeared on the stage with Trump during the inauguration. Then Amazon bought for an exorbitant price the so-called documentary of Melania Trump. And it went on from there to changing the editorial page and changing the opinion pages generally, such that there are no commentators who are essentially left of center. That has really damaged the reputation of the Post.
So what's the answer here? I understand corporate leaders wanting to keep below the radar with Donald Trump. But if you're a newspaper and a newspaper of record, it's not really a choice you have, right? If accountability and bearing witness involves crossing the thresholds of power, it is what it is. That's what you signed up for.
I do believe that's what he signed up for. I mean, that is the purpose of a news organization in this country. It's the reason we have the First Amendment. The whole idea of the First Amendment, the idea of the founders was to hold government to account. I think Jeff Bezos should have known that when he acquired the Post. I think he did know that, as a matter of fact, and he spoke eloquently on behalf of that mission. But now he worries about reprisals from Donald Trump.
Let's talk about that, because you were there when he said democracy dies in darkness. You understood, and you and I talked about this, the things that he did that helped put that newspaper back on track and as in his words, offered a financial runway. What changed? Is this because of Bezos's other interests, where he will benefit from either deregulation or the amount of money that you can make under this president? What has changed?
Well, he's denied that that's the reason, but I think it is the reason, actually. Look, I mean, Amazon has a lot of contracts with the federal government, particularly for cloud computing. Bezos has a private space company called Blue Origin. It is kind of coming into its own right now. He needs and wants federal contracts for Blue Origin. He just hosted the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, at Blue Origin just a day or so before the announcement of these layoffs at the Washington Post. And I think he's worried about antagonizing Trump and his team. So that's what he's facing. But he did buy a media organization. He bought a press organization that has a deep heritage and history and a strong mission. And he should maintain that.
Hey, unlike in some countries like Hungary or Greece, places like that, where people buy media organizations in order to prop up the administration, that doesn't seem to be what happened here. Jeff Bezos bought a media organization because it seems like he believed in what its mission was, and now it may be coming in the way of the things he wants to achieve. So what's the answer? If Jeff Bezos were to just sell the Washington Post, could that help solve this problem, and somebody who actually believes in its mission can move it forward?
Well, look, I mean, I should say right here that, I mean, the news department, and there's a division between the news department and the opinion department. The news department of the Post continues to do an excellent job, story after story, holding this government to account. And I trust and I hope that that will continue. You know, a sale is complicated because, first of all, I mean, the big question is sell to whom? What would their interest be? There's always the risk that the most likely buyers would be people who would be allies of Donald Trump. We've seen allies of Donald Trump who are now owners of CBS and have aspirations of acquiring the company that owns CNN as well. Allies of Donald Trump, the very same people have an ownership interest now in TikTok. So the question is, sell to whom?
Okay, and so help me with that, because that's been an emerging question for some years. What's your best answer to that? Should maybe publications of record be owned by some sort of public trust? What is the answer to that? Because we can't just have these big things, big names, big publication names moving between rich people who will all do similar things.
Well, there's no easy answer to that. I wish I had one. I mean, I think it would be a great idea if the Washington Post were put into some sort of nonprofit, if Jeff Bezos himself could capitalize it for, 10 years, put $1 billion into it or something like that, and then say, look, after that 10 years, you're on your own. He could get a tax deduction for that, and you could have an independent board, all that sort of thing. I think a lot of the subscribers who have left because they were very upset over what Jeff Bezos has done, would return to the Post. I think the likelihood of that happening is quite low, as a matter of fact. I don't believe that Bezos is interested in doing that. From what I've heard, there have been a couple of potential buyers who've approached him. He's rejected those offers. Other people have discussed the idea of some sort of nonprofit arrangement. He's rejected that as well. So apparently he wants to hold on to it. You'd have to ask him why he wants to do that.
Marty, thanks as always. Good to see you. Marty Baron is the former executive editor of the Washington Post. All right, coming up, I watch a lot of Law & Order, and you often see the cops and lawyers on that show obtaining a warrant or a judge's approval before they go searching around through people's stuff. And if they don't, sometimes the search gets thrown out before it gets to court. Well, the Trump administration is using a secretive legal workaround to get hold of people's data, and they're using it to target everyday people who question Trump's immigration crackdown.
Outrage increases over President Trump's social media posts depicting the Obamas as apes. It's important to note that his racist rhetoric is just a reflection of the racist policies he's been pushing since day one of his presidency. Shortly after taking office the second time, Trump issued executive orders ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at federal agencies and in the private sector. And on Friday, a federal appeals court sided with the Trump administration and lifted a block on the president's DEI crackdown. Trump is also continuing his election fraud schemes and singling out cities with a majority black and brown population. This week, he falsely called out cities like Philadelphia and Atlanta for, quote, horrible corruption. On top of it all, the president is determined to rewrite black history. The latest attack includes removing the word racist from monument brochures describing the killer of civil rights activist Medgar Evers. Byron Della Beckwith, who murdered Evers in 1963, belonged to the nation's most violent white supremacist group, the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And all of that was just this week. Eugene Robinson is back with us. You know, Eugene, I have a Substack out today where I point out I've been calling Donald Trump a racist since 2015.
2015, yeah.
2015.
Yeah.
And I wrote a column just saying, you know, dude's racist and he shouldn't be anywhere near the Republican Party nomination. And he sent me back a nasty gram. I think, do we have the picture of it? He didn't like what I wrote. So he writes, Jonathan, you are the racist, not I. Get rid of your hate, in quotation marks. And then you can see it on the left side of your screen. Best wishes. Donald.
Wow.
Donald
Best
Trump.
wishes, right.
Best
Thank you for
wishes.
your attention to this matter.
Right.
Yes.
So anyone who's been paying attention to Donald Trump all these years isn't really surprised.
Central Park 5. I mean, you can go way back.
Way
with
back.
Donald Trump. Refusing to rent to black tenants. When he was taking over the real estate company from his father, he got sued by the federal government and had to settle, and essentially admit that that's what we were doing. So no, that the racism goes way back.
And the racism also invades everything. Right? Because there's one thing for someone to be personally racist, right? Yes. For them to believe that black and brown people are beneath them. But then the question also becomes, when they're in politics, what do they do with that racist feeling, right? That racist mindset. And it appears to be, for Donald Trump, a way, not just the discrimination that you're talking about when he was renting, but also his claims of so-called reverse racism, upending the DOJ Civil Rights Division. This is from CBS earlier last month. Several former Justice Department employees said the department's focus is shifting. It will seek to protect white people against alleged, quote, reverse discrimination. Trump said civil rights protections and programs have hurt white people. I think that a lot of people were very badly treated.
Yes. So, look, what's the one class of refugees that he wants to admit to? White South Africans. Those are the only people he, for the entire world, and he doesn't want any of these people from these S-hole countries, which happen to include all of us here, right? And that it is, and then Atlanta and Philadelphia, going after cities where it just so happens that a whole lot of black people have come out and voted against him in all of his elections. It's kind of it's transparent. It's been there all along, and many of us, like Jonathan, have pointed it out. Yet it has not weakened him at all with his base.
Well, what does that tell?
And in fact, one would argue it's been applauded by much of his base. And then there are other Republicans who used to at least pay lip service to diversity, if not actually support it, who just sort of go along and pretend, oh, I didn't hear that, or I didn't get to that. This is it's shameful, but it has real impact on real people.
But Trump won 15% of black voters in 2024. Yeah. It was an 8% increase from his first administration, where he arguably also implemented and ran on a number of racist policies. But I think on Friday, a lot of people were surprised, at least journalists who have been reading the Republican tea leaves as much as possible, that so many Republicans came out against the social media post.
Tim Scott immediately, It's the only racist thing I've seen.
I've never heard Tim Scott issue such a pointed
let's pull up the list.
admonition of Donald Trump. Do we have that?
Yep.
These are the House members: Tim Scott, Pete Ricketts, Roger Wicker, some of the usual suspects, but also Katie Britt, Nick LaLota, French Hill. These are people, some of whom were elected in deep red districts. Yeah. Why do you think this was a line crossed for them?
Because it was so hideous and so totally reminiscent of like the 1950s, the Bull Connor days, the George Wallace days. And there was nothing clever or sophisticated about it, just portray the first black president and first lady as apes. It shocked people. I think Tim Scott was shocked, but people like Roger Wicker and Katie Britt, from the South, who not only have many black constituents, but who recognized it for what it was. And I just think they were genuinely, this is like a bridge too far. You've got to be kidding. And it is stunning. It stuns me. I personally think Trump posted it himself. He says, well, it was some lower-ranking aide. But that, in a sense, doesn't matter. That anything like that would come out of any White House is absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable.
All these people acting surprised need to watch some television. Tim Scott being so surprised that this happened is surprising to me.
Joining me now is Liz Stein, Epstein survivor and advocate against human trafficking. Liz, welcome to you. You just heard Bill Gates there. Any reaction to him essentially washing his hands of the sordid bits of the Epstein files while apologizing at the same time? Should he have known in real time that friendship with Jeffrey Epstein was a mistake?
think that's a question that we wonder about all of the men whose names we're seeing right now. I really don't know what to make of that. I think that anyone whose name is being exposed at the moment is trying to run for cover. And I want to reiterate that just because someone is mentioned in the files doesn't necessarily mean that they're accused of any wrongdoing.
You're
and
right.
that is why, well, that's why it's so important for the DOJ to do their job.
All right. But as we look ahead to tomorrow, your sister survivor, Danielle Bensky, told me she does not trust anything Ghislaine Maxwell might say to Congress tomorrow. So what do you expect to hear? And what are the questions that you would hope lawmakers would press Maxwell on?
Maxwell was central to this sex trafficking operation. And, we haven't really heard a lot from Ghislaine Maxwell, and I don't anticipate that we're going to hear much from her tomorrow. I think that we're going to see her plead the fifth. And I think that when she does answer questions, that she will talk around the points in a way to distract. And I want people to understand that, Ghislaine Maxwell has perjured herself before, both in depositions and in her discussion with Todd Blanche this summer. So I really don't know how much weight we can put anything that Ghislaine Maxwell has to say about what's happened. But I really don't expect any transparency from her, unfortunately.
But why do you think the committee is giving Maxwell this platform? It's a hearing when survivors have not yet had a chance to tell their stories in Congress.
That's a really good question. Why do we continue to listen to someone who has, evaded questions, who hasn't been transparent? This is someone, like I said earlier, who is central to this sex trafficking operation. And I can tell you that when Ghislaine Maxwell was on trial, I traveled every day from my home in Philadelphia to New York City to be at the trial. And I was there when she was sentenced, and she showed absolutely no remorse at sentencing. And so I think that we're just going to continue to see the same from her.
Can I ask what that was even like, listening to her testify? And what did that do for you? I mean, every day in your travels from New York back to home in Philadelphia and back the next day.
It was exhausting, but I could not have imagined not doing it. When I attended Maxwell's trial, I was not public, and I didn't become public until the last day of the trial. And I did that really intentionally because I didn't want the media to focus on anything other than what we were hoping to see, and that was justice. And we did see that. When Maxwell was sentenced, I fought under the Crime Victims' Rights Act to be able to deliver a victim impact statement at her sentencing. And when I did that, I was very honest, brutally honest about what my life looked like after my involvement with Epstein and Maxwell. And one of the reporters who reported on that actually said that I nearly shouted as I addressed the court. And I did that intentionally because I didn't want anyone to miss what I was saying, because it was so important that people understood it's not just getting away from an abuser. This kind of trauma impacts your life for decades to follow.
Liz, this is a hard question to ask, but we know the impact on you and your life. But given the vast number of girls and young women who are alleged to have been trafficked, do you think she recognized you, that she knew who you were?
I don't think so. This is a crime that by, the Department of Justice own admission has over 1,000 victims. I can't say whether she remembered me or not, but it wasn't like she was emotionally invested in us. I think that it was just another girl, another girl, another girl.